In the Andaman Sea, roughly 1,200 kilometers off the coast of India, there is an island measuring 72 square kilometers. A United States Navy vessel approached it in 1981 when a cargo ship ran aground nearby on the reef. The island's inhabitants responded with arrows, not a warning, a response. The same response their ancestors had given to every outside contact for approximately 50,000 years. The island is North Sentinel Island. The Indian government enforces a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone around it, under the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act of 1956. Not to isolate the tribe for anthropological curiosity, because what happens to anyone who crosses that line has been documented enough times that the documentation became law. Today I will show you 7 places on Earth where crossing a specific threshold is not a risk. It is a terminal event. Each location escalates on one axis. The degree to which the force that kills you cannot be negotiated with, appealed to, or outrun. By the end of this list, you will reach a single room inside a building in northern Ukraine, where a chain nuclear reaction may have quietly restarted in 2021. 35 years after the explosion that was supposed to end all reactions inside it forever, scientists know precisely where that room is. Remote cameras have been sent inside. Most of those cameras stopped transmitting before they could be retrieved. In the 7 places on this list, the threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. North Sentinel Island sits at the far western edge of the Andaman Archipelago, approximately 50 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land. Its interior is dense tropical forest. Its beaches are white coral sand. From the air, it looks like a postcard. From a fishing boat at 2 kilometers offshore, it looks like a line of men with bows and arrows watching the water. The Sentinelese are one of the last uncontacted populations on Earth. Their exact number is unknown. Estimates range from 40 to 500, because counting requires approach. The island was briefly occupied by British colonists in the 19th century, who brought several Sentinelese individuals on board a ship. Every one of them fell ill. Several died within weeks. The British stopped trying after that. Anthropologists who attempted peaceful contact in the 1960s and 1970s, leaving coconuts and metal tools on the beach from boats anchored offshore, were periodically met with gifts, periodically met with arrows, with no pattern that could be decoded as invitation. In November 2018, a 26-year-old American missionary named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to carry him toward the island before dawn. He had been planning the approach for months. He entered the water and swam to shore alone. The fishermen waited at a safe distance. The next morning, they watched through binoculars. The Sentinelese were on the beach dragging a body. Chow's remains were never recovered. The Indian government investigated, then closed the case. There is no protocol that would allow retrieval without sending more people across the same line. 50,000 years, one answer, every time. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. If the idea that a place can be made permanently lethal by its inhabitants rather than its chemistry captures you, subscribe. Each item ahead makes the last one look like a misunderstanding. From the Indian Ocean, we move 8,000 kilometers west and south to a small island 33 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state in Brazil. Ilha da Queimada Grande. Locals call it Snake Island. The Brazilian Navy calls it a restricted zone. Scientists who have studied it call it the highest confirmed density of a venomous snake species relative to land area on any island on Earth. The golden lancehead pit viper, Bothrops insularis, evolved in isolation after this island was cut off from the mainland approximately 11,000 years ago when post-glacial sea levels rose. No ground-level predators developed to limit the population. By the time scientists began formal surveys, the island held an estimated 1 individual specimen per square meter of total terrain. Not the beach, the entire surface. 430,000 square meters of rock, forest, and cliff. 1 lancehead pit viper per meter, averaged across the whole. The venom is hemotoxic. It begins dissolving the tissue around the bite site within 3 to 6 hours. Internal hemorrhage follows. Without anti-venom treatment, which is unavailable on the island, necrosis spreads to the bloodstream. Death follows within hours in the most severe presentations, within 2 to 3 days in milder cases. The lighthouse on Snake Island was automated years ago. The story of the last lighthouse keeper's family has circulated for decades among Brazilian Coast Guard personnel. The family was found dead inside the lighthouse, windows broken in from outside. The Navy conducts annual maintenance visits under strict protocol: full leather boots, thick gloves, a medical team on standby at the vessel offshore. Civilian landings are prohibited. Scientific access is granted approximately once per decade and requires a formal permit from the Brazilian Navy. No Golden Lancehead chose to make the island dangerous. The island made them, and they made it uninhabitable. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. We cross the Atlantic to a grey island off the northwest coast of Scotland, Gruinard Island. 1 kilometer long, half a kilometer wide. It sits in Gruinard Bay, visible from the mainland coast road in the Scottish Highlands. In summer 1942, the British Ministry of Supply shipped a flock of sheep to Gruinard and detonated an anthrax bomb in the air above them. Every sheep on the island died within days. Bacillus anthracis does not kill and disappear. The bacterium forms spores when conditions become hostile: drought, temperature extremes, the absence of a host, and those spores do not simply deactivate, they enter dormancy. Viable anthrax spores have been found in Siberian permafrost after 70 years. In Svalbard reindeer carcasses after 75 years. In certain environmental contexts, survival well beyond a century has been documented. The ministry classified Gruinard under the Official Secrets Act and stopped discussing it. A warning buoy was placed in the water. The island remained sealed for 48 years. In 1987, under public pressure, partly triggered when anonymous packages of soil from Gruinard were mailed to government offices on the mainland to prove the contamination had not simply vanished, a decontamination project began. Teams in full hazmat suits applied 280 tons of diluted formaldehyde solution to the island's surface. The upper layer of soil was stripped and removed. In 1990, the island was officially declared safe. The Ministry of Defense sold it back to the descendants of the original owners for £500. In the years following, independent soil sampling returned positive results for anthrax spores at depth. One camp of scientists holds that the 1987 decontamination was thorough enough to have neutralized the biological hazard at any practically relevant level. The other camp points to the Porton Down review and subsequent independent sampling, arguing that surface-level formaldehyde application cannot guarantee sterile conditions throughout the island's full soil profile. Which camp are you closer to? The island exists. The question has not been formally resolved. The families who own it do not farm it. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. The places on this list so far were made lethal by human decisions, by biological evolution, by a weapon its creators forgot to deactivate. The next location was built by no one. It is Earth's own internal chemistry, expressed at a surface that humans happen to stand on. The Danakil Depression in northeastern Ethiopia is one of the lowest, hottest, and geologically most active regions on the planet's surface. The deepest point sits 116 meters below sea level. Average recorded temperatures year-round exceed 34 degrees Celsius. Surface temperatures at the hydrothermal fields of Dalal, a volcanic complex within the depression, have exceeded 63 degrees Celsius in direct measurement. The human body begins experiencing heat stroke when core temperature climbs above 40 degrees Celsius. At Dalal, the ambient air temperature in the depression can approach that range before midday. But temperature alone does not make Dalal exceptional. The hydrothermal pools at Dalal rank among the most acidic, naturally occurring liquids ever measured on Earth's surface. Chemists have recorded pH readings in some pools approaching 0.3. Pure stomach acid sits at approximately pH 1.5. Automobile battery acid sits at approximately pH 0.5. Dalal's pools fall below both in the most extreme measurements. They are simultaneously hypersaline brines, chloride concentrations that would dehydrate living tissue on contact through osmotic pressure alone, and corrosively acidic. The two mechanisms compound each other. The gases are invisible in the shimmer of the heat. Sulfur dioxide, chlorine, and hydrogen sulfide rise from hydrothermal vents in the pools and dissipate slowly in the still air of the depression. Sulfur dioxide at concentrations above safety thresholds causes pulmonary edema. The lungs fill with fluid within minutes. In 2019, researchers from the Spanish National Research Council published findings in Nature Ecology and Evolution. The Dalal hydrothermal pools contain no living organisms, not extremophilic bacteria, not archaea, not any biological material detectable by the methods used. The pools are too acidic, too saline, too hot, and too chlorinated for life in any form to establish itself. This is the only known location on Earth's surface where scientists have found liquid water and determined with methodological certainty that life not only is absent, but cannot persist. Afar nomads cross the margins of the depression seasonally to harvest salt from the flats. They move with purpose. They do not approach the pools. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. On the night of August 21, 1986, in northwestern Cameroon, a crater lake called Lake Nyos did something that no living person within 25 kilometers of its shore survived to explain from the shore itself. Lake Nyos sits over a volcanic fissure that feeds carbon dioxide into the water column from below. Under the pressure of the overlying water at depth, CO2 dissolves and accumulates year after year. The surface of the lake looks still, blue, unremarkable. There is no visible sign of what is building below. What happened on the night of August 21 is classified as a limnic eruption, a phenomenon so uncommon that this event is one of 3 confirmed instances in recorded human history. An unknown trigger, possibly a small landslide into the lake, or a fresh pulse of CO2 from the volcanic fissure below, caused a rapid destabilization of the water column. The CO2 came out of solution in minutes, like a pressurized cylinder uncapped all at once. Approximately 1 cubic kilometer of carbon dioxide was released. The cloud was invisible. It was heavier than air, so it stayed near the ground and moved downslope through the valley below the lake at approximately 100 kilometers per hour. It displaced oxygen from the air inside every enclosed space it entered: houses, a church, sleeping quarters. 1,746 people died in their homes, approximately 3,500 cattle, birds in mid-flight. The survivors were those on high ground, above the path of the cloud. Some of them woke to find everyone else gone. Lake Nyos now has 3 vertical pipes installed in the water column that bleed CO2 from depth to surface in controlled quantities, a French and Cameroonian engineering project funded in part by the Japanese government. The degassing has reduced the stored CO2 by a measurable fraction. The villages within 25 kilometers of the shoreline remain abandoned. The pipes require maintenance. A sufficiently large tectonic event reaching the volcanic fissure below could trigger a new eruption regardless of the pipe system's state. There would be no warning. There would be no detectable change in the lake's appearance. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. From Central Africa, we move to the Central Pacific, Bikini Atoll, Republic of the Marshall Islands. A ring of coral islands enclosing a lagoon 40 kilometers wide and 30 kilometers long. The islands were inhabited by Micronesian peoples for at least 1,000 years before 1946. In that year, the United States military met with the island's 167 residents and asked them to leave so that nuclear tests could be conducted in the lagoon for the good of mankind. The residents agreed, citing a phrase from their own tradition about making a sacrifice for the welfare of all men. They were moved to the atoll of Rongerik, which had half the food resources of Bikini. Several families nearly starved in the first year. Between 1946 and 1958, 67 nuclear devices were detonated at Bikini Atoll. The largest was Operation Castle Bravo, detonated on March 1, 1954. Yield: 15 megatons. The scientists had estimated 6. The explosion was 1,000 times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. The fireball reached 7 kilometers in diameter. The fallout contaminated 7,000 square kilometers of ocean. The crew of a Japanese fishing vessel, the Lucky Dragon No. 5, was 90 kilometers outside the designated danger zone and received radiation doses that killed 1 crew member and injured the remaining 22. Cesium-137 binds to potassium receptor sites in soil and is absorbed by plant life exactly as potassium would be. The coconut palms on Bikini Atoll absorbed it through their roots. In 1968, after a decade of scientific surveys that reported declining radiation levels, the United States declared Bikini safe and returned some of the displaced residents. By 1978, blood analysis of the population showed cesium-137 concentrations high enough that medical authorities ordered immediate re-evacuation. The residents left again. They have not returned. Bikini Atoll is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Scuba divers visit annually to dive on the warships sunk during the tests. The ships are still measurably radioactive. Scientists who visit wear dosimeters and limit surface exposure time. The soil on the islands reads above safe limits for human habitation. The coconuts are above safe limits for consumption. Plutonium-239, deposited in quantity during the tests, has a half-life of 24,100 years. The tests ended in 1958. The threshold is known. What crosses it does not return. But here is where the escalation on this list reaches a different order of magnitude. Bikini Atoll, after 67 nuclear detonations, can still be approached by people in protective equipment. Scientists stand on its beaches. Divers descend through its lagoon. The contamination can be measured from a distance, mapped from the air, assessed with instruments that do not require entering a sealed room. The final location on this list is a room that has been entered by remote cameras. Most of the early cameras stopped transmitting before they could be retrieved. Remember the beginning of this list, the invisible threshold that kills before you understand you have crossed it. The last place is a room inside a building in Pripyat, Ukraine, where what remains of a nuclear reactor continues to generate heat, continues to emit radiation through the floor and walls and ceiling around it, and, according to sensor readings published in Science in 2021, may be sustaining nuclear chain reactions for the first time since the explosion that created it 35 years earlier. On April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant underwent a catastrophic steam explosion during a safety test. The reactor lid was blown into the air. The core was exposed to open atmosphere. The graphite moderator caught fire and burned for 10 days, releasing radiation equivalent in cesium release to approximately 400 Hiroshima-sized bombs over the surrounding region. What happened inside the building in the first hours after the explosion was not simply a fire. It was a phase transition. The nuclear fuel rods, the graphite moderator, the reactor's metal support structures, and the concrete floor of the reactor housing fused at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius into a single flowing material. Physicists classify it as corium, a term coined specifically for this class of material, which has no prior existence in nature and no precedent in recorded engineering history. The corium burned through 3 feet of reinforced concrete and poured into the rooms below the reactor. By the time it cooled and partially solidified, it had formed a mass approximately 2 meters across on the floor of a sub-reactor space several stories below where the explosion occurred. Workers who arrived in the days afterward named it the elephant's foot, not affectionately, because the shape left them no better word. In January 1987, a robotic camera on wheels was sent into the sub-reactor space to photograph the elephant's foot. The robot's electronics were destroyed by radiation before it could complete the task. A second camera produced approximately 500 milliseconds of footage before it failed. The first human photographs were taken by a man named Artur Korniev, who extended a camera on a pole around a corner, pressed the shutter without looking, and retreated. He stood within range for less than 30 seconds. He developed cataracts and other radiation-related health problems. He survived. At the time of the explosion, the corium surface read approximately 500 Roentgens per hour, a lethal dose for a human without treatment, roughly 450 Roentgens, accumulates over a period of hours at that rate. By the 1990s, decay had reduced the reading to approximately 8,000 millisieverts per year, still lethal with extended exposure, still above the level at which the human body can repair damage as fast as it accumulates it. The building above the corium, the emergency concrete sarcophagus constructed in 1986 by workers who received their full annual permitted radiation dose in the first 2 minutes on site and were rotated out, was considered structurally unsound from the moment it was completed. Cracked concrete, roof panels that could collapse under their own weight. In 2016, a new containment structure was slid into position over the old sarcophagus. The new safe confinement is the largest movable land structure ever built, 257 meters wide, 108 meters tall, 36,000 tons of steel. It was designed to last a minimum of 100 years. Its purpose is not to make the corium accessible. Its purpose is to prevent the building from collapsing on its own contaminated interior for the next century, while humanity figures out what to do next. In 2021, sensors embedded in the structure detected elevated neutron flux in the sub-reactor spaces beneath the elephant's foot. Neutron flux is the signature of nuclear fission, of chain reactions. The readings, published in a paper in the journal Science, described the situation as fission reactions possibly occurring within pockets of corium that had previously been considered stable. The paper used the analogy of embers in a campfire, technically controllable, but requiring monitoring. Whether those reactions have since stabilized, continued, or grown can only be known through sensors. No person has entered the room to investigate. No person has stood near the elephant's foot in decades. The cameras that have been sent in do not always come back. 7 places, 7 different mechanisms, a tribe that has enforced its boundary for 50 millennia, a snake population that evolved to fill every available meter of ground, a biological weapon that outlived the war it was built for by 8 decades and counting, a hydrothermal field where Earth's own chemistry has rendered the ground too corrosive for any organism to survive, a crater lake that exhaled carbon dioxide in a single night and killed 1,746 people while they slept, an atoll where the soil will read above safe limits for human habitation long after every institution that contaminated it has ceased to exist, and a room where the remnants of a nuclear core may still be sustaining reactions beneath a structure that was never designed for anyone to go back inside. The word forbidden usually implies a choice. Someone chose to close a door, and that same someone could choose to reopen it. The places on this list mostly made no choice. The island's archers have held their boundary longer than recorded history. The snakes did not decide to be numerous. The anthrax spores did not engineer their own longevity. The lake does not decide when to exhale. The cesium in Bikini's soil will still be measurably present in 4,000 years. And the corium below Reactor 4 continues to warm the space around it, with or without observers, with or without instruments, with or without a name for what it is doing in that sealed room below the steel arch. The next time you hear a place called dangerous, measure it against this list. Most dangerous places give you a warning, a visible boundary, a temperature you can feel before it injures you. These 7 give you nothing. They exist at the threshold, and the threshold holds. But all 7 of today's places share one quality. They occupy the surface. You can observe Snake Island from a boat in the distance. You can fly a drone over Bikini's lagoon. You can read Dalal's acid levels with instruments extended on poles above the pools. The surface, however lethal, can be watched from outside its own perimeter. There is another category, places built not to kill those who approach, but to survive whatever the surface does to itself. Underground cities, carved into rock or constructed in tunnels, that were sealed from above during a specific hour of a specific century and have not been opened since. 7 of them still exist in that sealed state. No earthquake opened them, no war reached their depth, no government has authorized entry. What is inside those chambers has not been touched in conditions that were engineered to outlast whatever catastrophe sealed them in the first place. They were built by people who understood, clearly and without sentimentality, that the surface cannot always be trusted. What was preserved below, what those chambers contain, and whether anyone has ever stood at their sealed entrances and understood exactly what they were looking at, that is where this story continues.